Okay, so you will just have seen the previous podcast, which looked at how the Weimar Constitution worked. Okay, so the Constitution of the New Republic was a very democratic constitution in which the people elected the president every 7 years. So the president was the figurehead, and the president's role was purely to appoint a chancellor and his ministers, but he had to appoint a chancellor and his ministers who commanded the support of the Reichstag. Okay, and the Reichstag was chosen directly by the people in elections every 4 years, and the people, the base of the pyramid here, had huge constitutional rights. So this was very much of a bottom-up system. It gave power to the ordinary people, very different from Germany before World War One and during World War One, which was, as we said in the previous podcast, an authoritarian system. Okay, so this was the New Republic was a very democratic system. So what this podcast is doing is it's going to just pull out for you what were the strengths of this system and what were the weaknesses of the system, because you could very well be asked in the exam, describe how the Constitution worked, in which case it would be a very descriptive answer, but you may be asked to explain how successful the Constitution was, in which case you would need to break your answer into two halves. First of all, what were the successes, and then what were the failings? Let's start off with the successes, the strengths of the new Constitution. Okay, well, first of all, it was more democratic. It was much more democratic than the old empire, which put most of the power in the hands of one man. Here we've got authority, power, decision-making, law-making is invested in the Parliament, and the Parliament is basically the elected representatives of the people. And remember, all people over the age of 20 have the vote, and that is men and women. Okay. Secondly, we looked at the voting system. The proportional representation was basically very fair. If a party had 35% of the vote across the nation, then it would have 35% of the seats in the Parliament. Okay, if a political party had just 2% of the vote, it would have 2% of the seats. Okay, so it was a very, very fair system. So that meant that no single party had all the power. It basically meant that usually power had to be shared between different political parties. They had to team up together, because it was very unlikely that one party would have more than half the vote. Only if a party had more than half the vote could that one party have all the power. In other words, that party would be the government. They wouldn't need to share power, because if the party had more than half the seats, then effectively laws would be passed just by the votes of that one party. Thirdly, it was a federal system. Now, here, just looking at the map, that's the map of Germany, but as you can see, Germany was consisted of lots of different regions. Okay, so for example, the different regions are represented by different colours on this graph. So the sort of light brown region is Prussia. Now Prussia was by far the biggest region within Germany, and the capital of Germany itself, Berlin, was also the capital of Prussia. So it was actually two capitals. Okay, it was the capital of Germany, but it was the capital of the Prussian region. But we don't use the word region, we use the word state. Okay, and there were actually 18 different states that made up Germany. A quick glance at the map, you can see that the second largest state down in the south east was Bavaria, and it's not marked on this map, but the city in Bavaria that was the capital of Bavaria was the city of Munich, which is a name you should recognise, the scene of the famous Putsch of 1923. Saxony was another German state. Brunswick was another German state. Thuringia, and so on and so forth. Württemberg. There are 18 of them altogether. Now, what does this mean? It was a federal system. Well, that basically means that the capital city, which is the seat of the German government that we've already looked at, shared power with those 18 states. Okay, so the capital city, Berlin, the seat of central government, the central government didn't hold all the power. Now it had power over the significant things. So the government, the Chancellor and his ministers and the Reichstag that we've already spoke about, passed laws on important things like foreign policy and economic policy and defence, things like that. But they didn't pass laws over everything. Some things, for example, education, were controlled by the separate states, and every state had its own state government that was elected only by the people of that state. So, for example, there was a Bavarian state government, and the Bavarian state government passed laws to do with education. Berlin, the capital of Germany, couldn't dictate how education was run. Education was decided by the 18 different states. And that's what we call a federal system. So they could pass local laws. That's the key point. Now, very importantly, the states ran the police. So there were actually 18 different police forces in Germany. Okay, the Berlin, the capital of Germany, did not control all the policing of Germany. Okay, Berlin was also the capital of Prussia, so the Berlin controlled the Prussian police force, but they did not control the police of the whole of Germany. Okay, so that is a strength. Why is it a strength? Because it paid respect to local differences. Germany was a big country. The customs and the traditions of Prussia were very different from the customs and traditions of Bavaria, and the people of Bavaria liked the fact that they could had some degree of control over local affairs. So that was a fair system. So the third point is central government, the main government of Germany. It passed laws on things like foreign affairs and defence, etc. But it was not all powerful. It didn't have power over everything. Okay, so that was a strength. There were, though, weaknesses. Okay, I've deliberately put a picture here, a little bit out of date, I suppose, but we've had an election since. But this time a year ago, we had a coalition government in England. The Conservatives didn't have half the seats in our parliament. They had less than half. Therefore, to form a government, they had to basically coalesce. They had to form a coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and therefore the leader of the Conservatives, David Cameron, had to basically reach agreement with Nick Clegg, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, because for David Cameron to get laws passed, his party didn't have half the seats in Parliament, so they had to get the Liberal Democrats to vote with them to pass the laws. Very similar system to Weimar Germany. Okay, but the point is that is a system. It may be fair, but it can lead to weak government. Why? As I've tried to represent with this particular picture here, it's all very well saying that you've got to work together, but two parties have got different views. They're going to not agree on everything. That's the nature of party politics, and so therefore, if you've got different views, it will take longer to pass laws. They've got to debate with each other, disagree with each other, iron out differences, and that can take time. And in the end, maybe they won't be able to reach agreement, and therefore they cannot get a law passed. Simple as that. Unless the Prime Minister can persuade the other party to vote with him in Parliament, the laws cannot be passed. And if that happens, basically government has collapsed. And in that circumstance, in Germany, the President of the Republic would have to then step in and, what we say, dissolve the Parliament, close it down for a few weeks, and call new elections, and the people of the country will have to go to the polls and to vote again. And hopefully after new elections they can create a government consisting of parties that will work together. So it's often hard to get the majority vote needed to pass laws. As a result, it was hard to act quickly and decisively to pass laws. And sometimes there are occasions when you need to have decisive, quick lawmaking. Okay, so that was a weakness of the new constitution. And then finally, the free speech laws. Remember the Bill of Rights? personal freedoms to vote, and freedom of the press, and freedom to be able to speak your own views. Well, that's all well and good, but basically remember the political spectrum from left to right, and we said that in the middle, the people in the middle here, that sort of middle ground, they were the people who supported the Republic. But over on the extreme right, you've got people who hated the Republic because the Republic signed the Treaty of Versailles, for example, and that was in particular ex-soldiers, people who had served in the army, resented the Republic for surrendering at the end of the war. And then on the extreme left, you've got the communists who resent the Republic because the Republic is giving power and influence to the rich, and they want everything to be given to the poor. So these groups here on the extreme right and the extreme left on our political spectrum, they are enemies of the Republic, but because the Republic believes in human freedom, then the enemies of the Republic, it's their basic right to be allowed to speak their thoughts, to publish leaflets, to spread their ideas, to try to get support. So, in a sense, the Constitution, one of the weaknesses is it allowed people to criticise the system. Okay, so that is another weakness of the Constitution. That's it. As a reminder of how the coalition government works that we looked at in the previous podcast, but that's it for this particular podcast on Weimar government. Now, the next podcast in this series about the birth of the Weimar Republic is about the Treaty of Versailles, and again that consists of two linked podcasts. The first one explains the terms, and the second one analyses how the German people felt about the Treaty of Versailles. Thank you.